My name is Samantha, and since I was a child, I felt like I was living in the shadow of someone else's life. When I was growing up, the difference between me and my twin sister Charlotte was so striking that sometimes it seemed that neither blood or a common past connected us at all. Charlotte was like the morning sunlight, always radiant and flawless. Her smile could melt any ice walls, and people were drawn to her like moths to the light. She was a golden girl, immaculate, loved by everyone, especially our parents. And I was the opposite. She was always quiet, withdrawn, preferring to stay in the shadows and dress in dark t-shirts with her favorite bands. It is not surprising that my father is a strict university professor, and my mother is an ideal housewife, could not understand why their youngest daughter did not fit into their ideas of a perfect family in any way. My father spent most of his time immersed in books, lectures, and scientific articles. His life revolved around the university, where he was a respected and strict teacher. He appeared in the house as if in passing, bringing with him an atmosphere of academic concentration and discipline. Mom, on the contrary, was the epitome of caring for home and family. She ran the household with such precise organization that sometimes it seemed as if we were living on a schedule carefully thought out to achieve maximum efficiency. Our family should be an example for everyone, she liked to repeat, and at these moments her voice sounded almost solemn. Since I was a child, I have heard my mother, addressing me, ask, "Samantha, why can't you be more like your sister?" These words pierced me every time, as if it were a new injection. She repeated them almost daily, especially in those moments when, with headphones on and my head down, I tried to withdraw into my music, shutting myself off from their ideal world. Charlotte, for her part, was always dressed in neat dresses. Her blonde hair fell freely over her shoulders, and she shone with the very approval that our parents craved. One day at breakfast, when my mother again reproached me for coming with headphones and an old t-shirt, Charlotte easily dropped, "I just don't understand why it's so hard for you to put on a beautiful dress and smile more." She threw her perfect hair over her shoulder, and for a moment it seemed to me that she came from another planet. We were so different. Her words cut me to the quick, even though it was an ordinary situation. At such moments, I felt like a stranger in my own home. It was especially hard for me in those days when the family was preparing for some official events. One Saturday morning, we had to attend one of my father's receptions at the university. These meetings have always been painfully boring, but obligatory for us. I decided to protest in my own way. I put on the darkest eyeliner, chose old, worn-out shoes, and seemingly insignificant little things immediately caused a storm. As I was coming down the stairs, my mother caught me with her eyes fixed on my shoes, as if it were dirt that could not be reconciled. "You can't come out like this," she exclaimed with undisguised horror in her voice. I shrugged, my usual defense. "I don't understand why this is so important." Mom sighed heavily, as if she was carrying the weight of the whole world on her shoulders, which, in her opinion, I was only making heavier. "You are the biggest disappointment in this house," she said. The words hurt more than usual, but I was just tired. I'm tired of having to explain my inconsistency with their ideal every time. "Samantha," she continued, "at least this time, can't you try to fit in?" Dad appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his high forehead furrowed, his eyes full of barely restrained disappointment. He stopped for a few moments, as if trying to gather the right words, although I knew he didn't need it. His silence always said much more than any reproaches. Finally, in a cold, almost detached tone, he said, "Samantha, go change your clothes. We're leaving in 15 minutes. His voice brooked no objections. He never shouted, he didn't need to. His genuine disappointment always hit harder than any big word. I felt everything inside me shrink from the oppressive weight of these expectations. Silently going up to my room, I replaced my favorite shoes with boring but acceptable ballet flats and wiped off half of the dark eyeliner. It was a ritual of submission that I performed over and over again, as if it could change something important in their eyes. There was an oppressive silence in the car, broken only by the soft chords of classical music, which my father always turned on before important events. "It calms me down," he said, although this music only acted on me as a reminder of how alien their life was to me. I looked out the window, watching the trees and houses flash by behind the glass, and felt a firm promise maturing inside me. One day I will be free. I will no longer live by their rules, by their patterns. One day I will live my life the way I want to, and no one will tell me what to wear, how to behave, or who to be. My room was the only place in this house where I could feel free. It was my refuge, my only space where I could pretend to live in another world, far from their ideal home. Unlike the rest of the rooms, which were a reflection of my parents' tastes and desires, my room breathed me. The walls were hung with sketches and music posters. Every corner breathed my dreams of escape. It wasn't just a space, it was my only island where I could hide from the reality of my family and its expectations. One evening, when I was trying to get lost in my playlist, listening to my favorite bands, the door opened a crack and my father entered the room. I didn't even hear his footsteps, I was so immersed in the music. He knocked only symbolically, as always, and his frowning face already foreshadowed an unpleasant conversation. "Samantha, turn down that noise," he said, slightly irritated. His voice did not rise, but it sounded with the same iron hardness as always. "And why didn't you study with Charlotte today? You know that exams are coming soon." I slowly pulled out one earpiece, feeling my heart begin to beat faster. "I'm studying, Dad. Just not with Charlotte. I study better alone." My father shook his head, clearly not believing a word I said. "You know our rules. Your sister gets good grades, and you should do the same." I sighed, trying not to let the disappointment overwhelm me, but it wasn't easy. "It's not about complication, Dad. I just don't understand why I have to do everything like Charlotte. Can't I learn in my own way?" His face didn't change, it was the usual expression of disagreement, as if my resistance was something ridiculous. Instead of answering, he moved on to another complaint. "And one more thing. Your friend. I saw you with them at the cafe yesterday. I don't think they're a good influence on you. You should spend more time with the daughters of my colleagues. They're more appropriate." These words caused an outburst of anger in me. "Suitable for what, Dad? In order to please you? Because they're discussing economics and pretending to enjoy these boring university parties?" Before he could answer, Mom appeared in the doorway. Her harsh voice burst into the room. "Your father is right, Samantha. These girls come from good families, they know how to behave. These are the friends you need." I stood up, feeling my temper rising like a tidal wave. What if I don't need the friends you choose for me? What if I want to choose my friends myself? What if I want to choose what to learn? Or even decide who I want to be? Mom pressed her lips together, her face became even more stern. "Samantha, we've already discussed this. You know that your future is connected with the university. We've planned everything for you, and you need to start thinking about settling down." The word sounded like a sentence. Settle down? I could barely contain my anger. "Do you mean that I should become someone's wife, like Charlotte? Is that all you see for me?" Mom's face softened, but her voice remained firm. "We just want you to have a good life, Samantha. Following our path, you will get exactly that, a good life." I repeated her words to myself, feeling the bitterness on my tongue. A good life, I thought, full of irony. But whose life is this? Is it mine or yours? At that moment, everything became obvious. There was no point in arguing, they only saw the path they had paved for me, the path they believed I should follow as dutifully as Charlotte. Charlotte and I were like two sides of the same coin, always close, but as if we existed in parallel worlds. Our differences manifested themselves in everything, in behavior, tastes, even in the way we looked at the world. The university has only reinforced this feeling. Charlotte, as if created for the life that was expected of us, was rapidly moving along the path of business management. She was the ideal student that every professor dreams of, attentive, active, always asking smart questions in lectures. When the professor smiled at her, I just watched in silence, feeling like a stranger in this world. I studied too, but it was always like trying to squeeze into someone else's shoes, which pressed and hindered. One afternoon, immersed in textbooks, I was sitting in the library, trying to overcome the boredom of constant boring assignments. Charlotte appeared unexpectedly. Her confident gait and light smile, as always, spoke of her complete self-confidence. She waved at me and sat down next to me, casually flipping through her neat notes. "Hey, Amy, are you coming to the study group tonight?" Professor Hall said he could come in. It would be useful for us to show ourselves. Her words sounded like something taken for granted, but I just sighed, feeling the weight of her expectations. "No, I don't think so." "This is not my scene, Charlotte," I replied, trying to get back to my notes. Charlotte frowned, her books thudding onto the table as an expression of her displeasure. "Amy, it's not about this being your scene. It's about making the right impression. We need to start taking this seriously, because we're graduating soon." I shrugged, not looking up from my textbook. "I'm taking this seriously, Charlotte. But not in such a way that it becomes my life. Why should I pretend?" She rolled her eyes slightly and sighed. "Sometimes, Amy, you have to play a game to be successful. It doesn't mean you have to like it, it's just a necessity." She waved her hand at her perfectly organized, color-coded notes. I creaked my chair and looked at her defiantly. Maybe I'm tired of doing what everyone else thinks is necessary. Have you ever thought about it? Her voice softened, though her gaze remained just as steady. "Amy, I just want to help you. Dad won't always be there to fix everything for you. What are you going to do if you keep pushing everything and everyone away?" "Maybe I'll figure this out on my own," I blurted out, feeling a wave of defiance rise in me. "Maybe I don't need to follow my father's path. Or in your opinion?" Charlotte was obviously upset, but she tried not to show it. "You are such a stubborn person," she said with a slight smile, and her eyes softened. "Just try it for me, okay? Come over tonight, talk to Professor Hall. It won't kill you." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I saw not just my perfect sister, but a man who cared about me in his own way. She really wanted me to succeed, but in her eyes there was only one right path, the one that had already been paved for us. "Okay, I'll think about it," I said, realizing that I wasn't ready to promise more. "Thank you," she smiled, as if we had made an unspoken agreement. "It's not that bad, you know. Maybe you'll even like it if you give it a chance." "I doubt it," I muttered, but deep down I knew that I had already agreed. This round was for Charlotte. So I'm off. The evening in the study group did not go as badly as I expected. Professor Hall, surprisingly, turned out to be an interesting person when he wasn't giving his dry lectures. I even asked one question, and for a moment I caught Charlotte's surprised but pleased look. Later, when we were returning to the dorm, Charlotte said to me, "See, it wasn't that terrible, was it?" This brief moment of vulnerability and reconciliation between us didn't last long. In her final year, Charlotte introduced us to her fiancé, a man 12 years older, a successful lawyer who exactly met our parents' expectations. Mom and Dad were ecstatic, their faces glowing with pride for Charlotte. She found the perfect man, the very type they dreamed of, accomplished, respected, with connections and status. At dinner, they couldn't stop praising her smart choice. And then, as always, their eyes turned to me. "Samantha, it's your turn to find someone suitable," Dad said with a kind of nonchalance, as if it was obvious. His subtle hint that my time was running out like sand through my fingers made me wary. Mom nodded enthusiastically, as if confirming something that had been decided a long time ago, and began to plan my life with the same organization with which she drew up her projects. Think about the future, dear. You need someone reliable who can provide for you, who has a good reputation, she said, and I felt like there was an invisible ceiling hiding behind her words, in which a pre-planned role was assigned to me. I remember staring at my plate at that moment, feeling the walls shrink around me. It seemed to me that the air around me had become denser, that every phrase of my parents enclosed me in an invisible cage. Charlotte's wedding was planned to the smallest detail by her mother, who literally breathed life into this event as into her greatest creation. Snow, white bridesmaid dresses, floral arrangements, perfect catwalks, all this demonstrated her vision of an ideal family, a prestige family. After the wedding, Charlotte was often under the close attention of her mother. Her mother visited her regularly, giving her advice on how to lead a family life, as if the success of their joint venture depended on it. With each visit, she checked to see if Charlotte was making sure that her life was on track. It seemed like everything was a foregone conclusion. Looking at this, I understood one thing: I didn't want my life to be so manageable. One day, lost in thought about escaping from the life that my parents had built for me, I was walking down the street, and suddenly I heard the low rumble of a motorcycle. That sound awakened something in me. My curiosity made me stop and look around. That's when I first saw him, Melvin. He was wearing a leather jacket. His carefree smile and self-confidence seemed almost unreal the moment he drove up to me. "You look like you need a ride," he shouted over the roar of the engine, a playful sparkle in his eyes. I hesitated, looking back at the house for a moment, where the familiar, controlled reality was waiting for me. Then I looked at Melvin's outstretched hand. What did I have to lose? Of course, why not? My voice betrayed a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Climbing into the back seat of his motorcycle, I felt a rush of adrenaline rush through my body. We raced away at such a speed that the wind tangled my hair, and I was laughing, really laughing, for the first time in a long time. Melvin turned to me over his shoulder, shouting, "Do you want to see my world?" I held on tighter, not wanting this moment to end. We stopped at a diner popular with bikers. This place was far from the cafes I was used to, which our parents called decent. But it was here, over a hamburger and French fries, that Melvin told me about his life, simple but intense. He was a welder, but his passion was motorcycles and roads that seemed endless and full of possibilities. It was so different from what I knew. Melvin's every day was filled with unpredictability, freedom that I couldn't even dream of. "Aren't you afraid to live like this?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the clatter of dishes and the lively chatter around us. Afraid? No, it's breathtaking. You never know what's around the corner. Isn't it better than having everything pre-planned? His eyes burned with every word, and I felt that this passion was contagious. Over the next few weeks, our meetings became more and more frequent. Each ride on Melvin's motorcycle took me further away from the life I was supposed to live and brought me closer to the one I wanted. One evening, as we were sitting on a secluded observation deck watching the sunset, Melvin turned to me and said, "Samantha, I'm not just driving to escape. I drive to feel alive. So that every moment makes sense. Do you feel it?" My heart was beating so fast that I clung to him, whispering back, "You make me feel free, Melvin." His smile grew even wider, and he pulled me closer to him. "Then let's not go back to a simple existence." His words sounded like a promise. It's been 5 months with Melvin, but it felt like a lifetime. These 5 months have been filled with what I've always dreamed of: speed, adventure, and, most importantly, freedom. One of those nights, under the stars and the soft hum of his motorcycle in the background, Melvin proposed to me. My heart answered yes long before my lips could utter the word. But there was one huge problem behind this fabulous moment: my parents. Melvin was everything they disapproved of: his rough features, wild spirit, his life as a welder. I was afraid to even think about how they would react. But love gave me courage. I decided it was time to introduce him to his parents. The day I brought Melvin home, he was wearing his usual leather vest, red t-shirt, ripped jeans, and a bandana. I liked that about Melvin, his absolute sincerity, his indifference to what others think of him. He was always himself. As we walked up the driveway to the house, I could already feel the weight of judgment hanging over us. In my mind, my parents were standing on the threshold, like judges, ready to deliver their verdict. When we entered the house, the air immediately became dense, tension hung in every corner. Mom's face paled instantly when she saw Melvin. Her eyes, usually calm and calculating, widened in shock. "What kind of world is this, Samantha?" she gasped, her voice almost a whisper, as if she was trying to find an explanation for what she saw in front of her. My father's reaction was much sharper. His face tightened, and his voice became as prickly as ice. "Who is this and why is he dressed like a bandit in our house?" "What is it?" he asked, not hiding his contempt. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the excitement that gripped me. My throat was dry, but I knew this was the moment of truth. "Mom, Dad, this is Melvin. He's the man I love. We're getting married." My words, which sounded so simple, hung in the air like a heavy cloud. The silence in the room was deafening. I saw a grimace flash across my father's face, a mixture of anger and disappointment. The father slowly turned to Melvin, and his voice sounded even more venomous. "Are you getting married? And what do you do for a living, young man? What are your qualifications?" He looked at Melvin with disdain, as if his words already foreshadowed an answer he didn't want to hear. Melvin, bless him, didn't hesitate for a moment. His answer came with the same calm confidence that has always attracted me. "I am a welder. I took several specialized courses and worked a lot after school. I earn an honest living." His voice was firm. He wasn't trying to justify himself, but he wasn't fawning either. He was just telling the truth. An expression of horror and disbelief appeared on the faces of my parents. Mom looked like she was about to faint. "A welder?" Her voice trembled like a leaf trembling in the wind. "Samantha, you can't be serious," her father said, his voice boiling with anger. "Do you expect us to bless this marriage? Are you ready to give up your future for a welder?" I felt my resolve grow stronger with every word they uttered. "Yes," I said firmly, "because he makes me happy. Isn't that the main thing?" I turned to my mom, hoping to find at least a shadow of understanding in her eyes. But her gaze remained cold, as if her heart refused to acknowledge what I was saying. "Happiness?" Her voice became shaky. "What about the life you could lead?" She looked at me as if she was not seeing her daughter, but a stranger who had chosen a completely different path. "This will be the life I choose," I replied, feeling the power being born in my words. My father shook his head as if he couldn't believe his ears. "Your decision is clear," he said, and his voice sounded like the final blow of a hammer. "We cannot and will not support this. If you choose him, don't expect to remain a part of this family." His words pierced me, leaving a painful mark. My heart was in turmoil, but my resolve remained unshakable. Melvin squeezed my hand softly, and the touch gave me strength. "Then I choose Melvin. I choose us. I choose my happiness," I said, feeling my voice grow firmer. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but my father stood adamantly, his jaw clenched so that it seemed they might burst from exertion. "If you leave with him," he said in his cold voice, "don't bother coming back." When Melvin and I left my parents' house, emotions overwhelmed me. Relief mixed with pain, fear with excitement. It all merged into one chaos, and every step I took forward seemed more than just a step, it was a leap into a new beginning. We drove in silence for a long time, only the roar of the motorcycle below us filled the night air, which now seemed different. It was cool, invigorating, as if every breath was a new page in life. When we finally stopped at a small diner on the outskirts of town, Melvin turned to me with a serious expression on his face. "Are you sure about this, Samantha?" "What is it?" he asked, his voice full of concern. "I mean, I'm really sure. The way back is now closed." His eyes searched mine for the slightest sign of doubt, but I only tightened my grip on his hand. "I've never been so sure of anything," I said, feeling the confidence in my words overcome the remnants of fear. "Everything feels right with you, as if this is what I had to do." Melvin smiled, that reckless, charming smile that won me over from the first day. "Then it's all right," he said softly. "Let's start our life together." We entered the diner and found a quiet corner at the very end of the hall. The waitress brought us 2 coffees without asking, as if she knew that was what we needed. We sat in silence, watching the cream swirl in the hot cups, thinking about the next step. "And what's next?" I asked, stirring with a spoon, looking at the funnels of cream in the cup. "We need to find a place to stay, at least for a while," Melvin replied, weighing all the options. "And maybe look for a job. I have some friends who can help us get started." His words sounded practical, but I knew that the path would not be easy. "It's going to be difficult, isn't it?" I said, more as a statement than a question. Melvin leaned across the table and covered my hand with his. "Maybe," he said, his voice warm and reassuring, "but we'll get through it. And it's not that new to us, is it?" I couldn't help but laugh. A short, sincere burst of merriment burst out of me. Melvin was always able to cheer me up, even at times when the future seemed full of uncertainty. We spent hours in this little diner, talking, planning, dreaming about our life together. From time to time Melvin would come up with some idea that sounded so wild and free that my heart started beating faster. "Maybe one day we'll save enough money to travel across the country, just you, me and the open road," he said, his eyes shining with excitement. And I, allowing myself to forget about reality at least for a moment, nodded, smiling. "I like it," I replied, plunging into dreams that previously seemed unattainable. With him, I could dream of something more than I had ever dared. Back in the city, we began to act. The next few weeks were a storm of activity. We found a small apartment on the outskirts, modest, but our own. It wasn't anything special, but it was our first place together, and that made it seem special to me. Melvin got a job at a local garage, and I worked part-time as a waitress at a diner nearby. Life was not easy. Sometimes it seemed that all we did was count every penny, but every evening, returning home and seeing Melvin, I realized that it was all worth it. When I entered our little house, I had the feeling that we had everything we needed. A few months later, we decided it was time to make our union official. We got married in a small but intimate ceremony. I hoped to the last that my family would show at least a drop of mercy and come to see how happy I am, but the chairs that we reserved for them remained empty. No congratulatory messages, no words of support, nothing. Despite the pain of their absence, the day was perfect. This day was about us, and no one could overshadow it. I gradually became closer to Melvin's mother. She welcomed me with open arms, calling me her daughter and filling the void left by my own family. Her warmth and unconditional acceptance helped heal the wounds my parents left me. Over time, things started to get better with Melvin and me. He completed additional training and became a certified underwater welder, which significantly changed our lives. His income has grown to $230,000 a year, and this has opened up new opportunities for us. We were able to afford to buy a townhouse in a nice neighborhood, the very place I had always dreamed of, but never thought that I would actually be able to live in it. It was the house I dreamed of as a child, the house that seemed like an unattainable dream to me. My heart skipped a beat every time I entered it, realizing that this was really happening to me. I started working as a dispatcher at Melvin's company. It wasn't just a job, I felt like I was part of something important. Every day I supported the person I loved, and together we built our future. On weekends, we would run away from the city on his motorcycle, enjoying the freedom that we lacked on weekdays. Those moments when the wind ruffled my hair and Melvin's warmth felt on my back were pure bliss. My mother-in-law has become a frequent guest in our house. Sometimes she would just come over to have coffee with me while Melvin was busy in the garage. One afternoon she came in, and I immediately noticed that she looked a little worried. We sat down at the kitchen table and she started talking, her voice low and anxious. "There's some bad news," she said, looking at me cautiously. "Something about a university professor involved in a harassment scandal." My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a wave of fear wash over me. "Did they say who?" I tried to keep my voice even, although everything inside was trembling. She shook her head. "No, the name wasn't mentioned, but you know how it is. It could be all over TV already." Nodding, I turned on the TV and tuned into the news. My heart sank when the presenter started talking about the scandal, and I froze when I saw my father's face on the screen. The details of the accusations against him echoed in my head, and I felt a cold wave of disbelief envelop me. Turning off the TV, I sat down heavily on a chair, trying to digest the news. At that moment Melvin came into the room, wiping his hands with a rag. He looked at my face and his brows furrowed in concern. "What's wrong, baby?" he asked, coming up to me. My voice was almost a whisper when I finally answered, "This is my father. He is accused of molesting a student." Melvin's face became serious. He sat down next to me and took my hand. His touch was warm and reassuring. "I'm sorry, Samantha," Melvin said softly, his voice full of sympathy. "This is hard news. How do you want to handle this?" I shook my head, feeling a wave of uncertainty rise in my soul. What could I do? My father and I lost touch a long time ago. Our paths diverged. I don't even know what can be done. "We're not close anymore," I replied, feeling the words cling to fear and bewilderment. Melvin squeezed my hand. His touch was like an anchor that kept me afloat in this ocean of emotions. "No matter what happens, I'm here." His voice was soft but confident, and it gave me strength. "We don't need to make decisions right now." I nodded, accepting his wisdom, and decided to wait, let events unfold and see where they lead. No matter what the circumstances, I knew Melvin would be with me. This realization gave me confidence that I would cope with any challenges. Life returned to its usual course, and everything seemed peaceful until one unexpected day at work. I was sitting at my desk when a familiar car pulled into the parking lot. My heart skipped a beat when I recognized my parents' car. I hadn't seen them for several years, and now their sudden appearance caused a storm of emotions, those feelings that I thought had long since subsided. When they got out of the car, I barely recognized them. My mother had lost a lot of weight. Her face was haggard, as if the scandal had drained all the energy out of her. The father, the same man who had once been stern and unshakable, now looked broken, like a shadow of himself. Mom was the first to notice me and rushed to me, her arms open, as if all those years of separation between us could be erased with one hug. But I couldn't hug her, not now. Instead, I took a step back, taking Melvin's hand, drawing strength from him. "Samantha, it was so hard to find you." Her voice was trembling, full of excitement and faint hope. The father, always more straightforward, did not delay for long. His voice was harsh, even bitter. "I was wrongly accused, you know that. I turned to your sister's husband for help, but he turned out to be a greedy leech who just wants to make money. Your sister supported him, and now they've kicked us out. We need your help." I looked at them in disbelief. Something broke inside me. How could they come to me with such requests after everything that happened? They rejected me when I chose Melvin, and now that they had nothing left, they came back with a demand. "Can I help you?" My words sounded almost like a mockery. After all these years, after everything you've said and done? Mom, desperately clasping her hands, said, "We have nowhere else to go. They rejected us too. We thought maybe we could stay with you." I almost laughed at the absurdity of the situation. Stay with me? After you cut me out of your life? You yourself made it clear that I am no longer your daughter. The father's face turned red, his old character flared up like fire. You owe us, Samantha. After all we've done for you. These words were the last straw. I felt a determination inside me that I hadn't had before. No, Dad. You're the one who's wrong. I don't owe you anything. You abandoned me because I chose my happiness over your expectations. And now you think you can just move in with me and act like we're a family again? The situation was getting more and more tense, and I could feel people starting to gather to watch our conversation. Mom, seeing that her words did not work, began to cry loudly, attracting even more attention. You are ungrateful, Samantha. After all we've done for you, she sobbed, accusing me. I took a deep breath, gathering all my willpower into a fist. No, Mom. I'm not ungrateful. I am free and happy. You have made your choice, and now you will have to live with its consequences. While Melvin and I were leaving, I heard my father shouting something after me, but his words no longer had any power over me. Melvin leaned over to me and quietly said something to the guard so that my parents would never come here again. The following months flew by filled with peace and love. Melvin and I welcomed our son into the world. It was a new beginning for our growing family. My parents never came back. That day in the parking lot turned out to be the last time I saw them. Part of me, of course, grieved about what could have been, but I knew I had made the right choice. I chose my new family, my path, and that was all that mattered.